We welcome Kurt Volker live on TV Rain. Nice to see you as always, Mr. Volker. Of course, I want to firstly ask you about your thesis on Russia's nuclear weapons, which you say they will not necessarily respond with in the case of a large-scale assault in Crimea. Why do you think that?
Well, let's separate out the issues here. First, let's just talk about nuclear weapons generally. Strategic use of nuclear weapons against NATO or the United States or the West, clearly, I don't believe Putin will do, because it would result in a nuclear response and be catastrophic for Russia. Russia would not survive as a state. Then you look at the question of tactical nuclear weapons. Will he use them on the battlefield in Ukraine? And here, I think the problem is that they don't help achieve any military goal. They will not help seize and hold territory, which is what the Russians want to do. Their forces are not prepared to be on a battlefield where nuclear weapons are being used. They would be suffering as well. And many countries, but particularly the United States, have warned Russia that any use of nuclear weapons, any use, including tactical, would result in devastating consequences for Russia, meaning there would be some kind of response, which I don't think Russia can afford. Other countries, such as China and India, have also said that they do not want to see Russia use nuclear weapons. Now, when it comes to Crimea, I think the issue, first off, is, of course, it's very important to Russia, but it's also very important to Ukraine. It doesn't make nuclear weapons any more usable than they were before. And in addition to that, I don't think the Ukrainians will need to try to control all of Crimea at this stage. What they will try to do, I believe, is isolate it from Russia, to cut off the logistical supplies and support so that Russia is not able to use it militarily in the same way that Russia uses Crimea militarily now. That's a very big difference from trying to use a lot of forces to try to control Crimea at this point.
Mr. Volker, is this information coming from a particular source or just your intuition?
These are my own conclusions that come from years of experience.
I had to ask, why now specifically, now that more than a year has passed with conversations ongoing about a counteroffensive, can Ukraine be in a position to begin the process of taking back Crimea?
Well, because they can. I think that is the answer. They weren't able to before this for a variety of reasons. Russian forces, when they started this war, were in a much stronger position than they are today. Ukrainian forces, when Russia started the war, were in a much weaker position than they are today. And Ukraine is now able to both hold the line where the Russians are attacking and concentrate and build its forces for the future. This is a relatively new development. So I think all of these things come together to give Ukraine greater capabilities compared with Russia than before. Ukrainians, I believe, they would have been, of course, prepared to negotiate about the future if Russia had not launched this full-scale invasion back in 2022. But with the invasion, with the war crimes committed by Russian forces, with the absolute destruction of cities inside Ukraine, mostly Russian-speaking people, in cities in Ukraine, Kharkiv, Melitopol, what we see in Bakhmut now, I don't think the Ukrainians can look at any piece of Ukrainian territory and think that Russia can stay there.
I can't help but ask this question, Mr. Volker. You are someone who is extremely well-versed on the situation in Ukraine and its various regions, so you are well aware of the fact that in Crimea there is a segment of the population that is pro-Russia. How do you deal with that?
Right. I'd say those who remain are more likely to be pro-Russian than those who Russia forced out. And you also have to ask, what do you do about the people that Russia forced out? All the Tartars, all the Ukrainians, all the Russian speakers who don't want to be part of Putin's Russia. It's a very complicated problem. And I don't think there's any one solution that satisfies everybody. But I think, first off, a solution that respects international law, that says that we respect the borders of a sovereign and independent Ukraine. That's one thing. And secondly, that Crimea should have some independent or autonomous status within Ukraine would be a reasonable thing. It had this before and could be achieved again. And then finally, I would think that if it is indeed recognized as part of Ukraine again, as it should be, then it could also be discussed as a demilitarized zone. It's a environmentally fascinating area. It's a beautiful location. It is a tragedy, really, that it has been militarized in the way that it has now.
Finally, you probably know that there is a lot of controversy regarding Crimea, even within the current Ukrainian government. I came across an interview with Mikhailo Podolyak, advisor to the head of office of the president of Ukraine, who says that Crimea is full of gangsters and criminals that comprise the occupying army and local administrative departments, suggesting that they should not be reintegrated and should be expelled instead. Some of them, he says, should be taken into custody. How difficult of a situation is this to navigate for the West? I understand, of course, that they support the Ukrainian armed forces and understand the sensitivity of the situation, but it's clearly something that will have to be confronted sooner or later.
Well, I think you need to be careful about equating the emotions that are very high right now because of the attacks against Ukraine and the war crimes against Ukraine as a policy dealing with the entire population. Clearly not the entire population of Crimea is a criminal, and they can't all be called criminals. And clearly there are some who would be. So you have to differentiate among those things. But I wouldn't take an emotional statement like that made at the height of the defense of Ukraine against Russia's attacks as a definitive statement of policy.
Mr. Volker, very quickly, in a word, are you expecting a large counteroffensive to take place in the near future?
Yes, I would say sometime this spring or summer, I would expect to see that. I think that they are preparing for it, but the exact timing and the exact locations, no one can say with certainty today.
Thank you very much. I hope we will be able to discuss the developments in Ukraine again soon. That was Kurt Volker, former U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine, joining us to discuss issues surrounding Ukraine on TV Rain.
TV Rain is on the air. For 12 years, we remained the only independent news channel in Russia. We had to leave, forced out of the country by new repressive laws after the first week of the war. Our freedom crushed by the authorities.
Мы приняли решение, что мы временно приостанавливаем работу телеканала.
We have operated as a European company from Europe and now also broadcast in English.
Kherson has surrendered.
Russia's propaganda targets have changed.
Putin cries havoc. We want to tell you firsthand what is really happening in Russia. Subscribe to TV Rain Newsroom on YouTube and let's take a look at our future together.